Thank you, Chair, and thank you. Let me start by thanking the organizers for having me here today, despite the fact that I'm not an educationist in the literal sense of the term. And so I will be reflecting as a member of the wider academic community, as someone who is a product of Indian education system, who has worked in India, who has worked abroad, and also who has engaged with the Indian wider academic community in India. So I want to start with a simple assertion, which I think we often need to remind ourselves, that education in India is facing a crisis of a magnitude that is often very difficult to comprehend. We all know it instinctively in our guts. You know, we know when we are thinking about where to send our children, to which schools to admit our children to, where to send them for higher education. We talk about it amongst our own communities, but then we get seduced by the more glamorous things. So the GDP is rising, excellent. Forex reserves are rising, great. We can build bridges, we can electrify villages, excellent. But I think at some point we forget that at the very basic level, what is driving this, the modern economy, our modern developmental agenda, is something very, very basic, which is this idea, our ability to produce, disseminate, and utilize knowledge. So as a knowledge provider, where does India stand? And I think we can build physical infrastructure with tight deliverable deadlines relatively easily. But in terms of constructing a modern educational infrastructure, in terms of constructing universities and schools and an education system that can meet the aspirations excuse me, of a rising India, that's a long-term challenge, and that's a challenge that I don't think we have comprehended enough. Even with the best of intentions, it's not a job that can be done overnight. So there was a session earlier today on India's rising global profile, and it is readily evident that knowledge is going to be the key determinant in the emerging global balance of power. And if India is to play a leading role in shaping that global balance of power, then it needs an education system that is up to the task. Also, for example, development of India is to meet its developmental agenda, it needs an education system that is up to the task. In a sense, we have to ask the question, can we make in India if we can't think in India? So I think this whole idea about ideas is something that we need to take very seriously. And in that context, when, you know, Education at 70 is the title of the conclave. So if you look at the education system today, higher education system in particular, we are looking at a very, very intellectually barren landscape. And barring a handful of our institutions, most of our universities, as has been told before, are not doing what they are supposed to do. That is teaching, researching, producing socially aware citizenry to strengthen the liberal democratic ethos in the country. And this is very unfortunate, especially when we look back at it, and especially at a time when we are saying, when we are about to and when we are talking about 70 years of Indian independence. There is a seriously powerful moment in Akbar Ahmed's book, Journey into Islam, an account of his travels across the global Muslim community. Ahmed, a devout Muslim who holds a chair in Islamic studies and has been a professor of international relations at American University, describes his travels to the Muslim world with his American students in this book. And when he visits AMU in India, an institution that has shaped his liberal sensibilities, what he finds are students who are shouting slogans in favor of Osama bin Laden, and also ready to descend into mob violence at the sight of their American visitors. Now for Ahmed, this was an acknowledgement, a sad acknowledgement of the collapse of the illegal model of liberal Islam. But I think for Indians, this is again underscores the collapse of the liberal ethos of one of our premier educational institutions. And the state of affairs in India's other universities is no different. We were just talking about JNU. Research and scholarship are missing. Political grandstanding is the order of the day. So the causes of this decline have been told many times before, and they are relatively readily obvious. From the stranglehold of the bureaucracy, which is strangling the way, it is very evident that how institutions should be run. They should be independent, they should be autonomous, they should set their own curricula, they should set their own norms. But we know what the bureaucracy has done to our institutions. But the more important factor has been the blatant politicization of the academia from 1970s onwards. where academics of a certain ideological persuasion were privileged by the powers that be. As a result, we have universities who have, instead of fostering diverse ideas and genuine contestation, have tended to become monoliths of political correctness. On the one hand, and also on the other, parochial ghettos. So now you have Mumbai University dominated by Maharashtrians, we have North Indian universities dominated by North Indian, so on and so forth. And somewhere in the mix, what is lost is this idea of a university itself. Think of Vishwabharati, Tagore's idea of a university, the idea of a university being as an open public space, which not only engages with its own surroundings, but is engaged with the wider world. And now we are becoming more and more parochial in our outlook towards education. Then there is corruption, of course, financial, we know, but also academic. The idea that only my friends, my acquaintances, my students should be given research positions, teaching positions, is endemic now in the Indian education system. So we can almost draw a line who was whose student and who was studying under whom, and draw out entire faculties in the country without actually looking at what is happening to the situation in merit. And in fact, it's so pervasive now that students of my generation, for us, it's very difficult to even visualize a situation where this was not the case. So we have not seen any university set up where actually we were providing employment opportunities to teachers on merit. So today it's entirely based on clans and academic communities. So therefore, apart from our premier institutions, IITs, IIMs, Indian Institute of Science, we find a higher education system that is unable to meet the challenge of rising India. And Indian universities, which ideally in any other context should have been the places of doing cutting-edge research, hub of intellectual activity, are more in use for all sorts of political machinations than for their research excellence. Years of low investment in higher education, along with a mistaken belief that providing uniform support to all universities, irrespective of the quality, have led to a situation where neither our academics nor our students have any incentive to undertake cutting-edge research. And now I sort of linking this back to the sort of idea of democracy, development, and dissent. The three components of a liberal democratic society, the market, the civil society, and the state, have three very different expectations from universities. The market requires trained personnel for the technologically complex economies. The state requires a corpus of trained elite to run the apparatus of the state. And civil society requires a liberal education to foster the deepening and broadening of democracy. Therefore, it doesn't, in an ideal world, it doesn't make any sense to distinguish between liberal and professional education. Both liberal and professional education remain essential in a free society and are necessary for the development of an enlightened individual, an individual who can think and communicate effectively, make relevant judgments, and most importantly, ably discriminate against values. A balance, therefore, is very important. Democracy requires a questioning citizenry based on liberal education that gives the citizens the ability to interrogate and investigate the claims of authority, something, again, the theme of this conclave. The real value of liberal education comes from a distinctive quality of mind and character that encourages the ability to explore moral and political questions from a variety of perspectives. India's higher education has long ceased to ask big questions, the most important of which should have been, what kind of citizens is the Indian education system producing? It is not at all evident that our higher education is preparing students to be democratic citizens in the true sense of the word, a task that should continue to be the principal purpose of liberal education in any democratic setup. And so the result is that we find Indian universities becoming intellectually dull places, imbued with careerism as opposed to the energy of contending ideas, limiting the questions Indian academics ask and the conclusions they reach. So in a sense, Indian universities now are in a position where they have to earn back social respect and reclaim their role at the center of public life by embracing a culture of reasoned inquiry, debate, and scholarship. In his perceptive meditation on the state of higher education in the US, Alan Bloom, and the book is The Closing of the American Mind, he concluded that a crisis in the university, the home of reason, is perhaps the profoundest of crises for a modern democratic nation. Though the crisis that he was drawing attention to arose from a different set of issues and circumstances facing the US academia then in 60s and 70s. The present crisis in the Indian university is equally profound and has the potential to profoundly affect the future of India. If the main goals of higher education are teaching students to think critically, broaden their intellectual horizons, and promote self-awareness, thereby moving beyond the mere instrumentality of education, then the higher education system, if the evidence is can be believed, should be considered a comprehensive failure. Indian universities have yielded intellectual and moral authority to a point where students are not taught values or are not even allowed to discover them. Our undergrads, our grads are not given a chance to understand the ideas that shape the past, with the result that they do not learn to think coherently about the present. They learn nothing about Indian heritage, its writers, its poets, its ancient texts, for fear of offending certain sensibilities. And as a result, the social credibility of the professorial class at the moment is at an all-time low. The fate of education, and in particular higher education, should be taken very seriously by us, especially if we are serious about preserving the democratic socio-political order in the country. It is wrong to assume that academics can engage in politics of the day simply by protesting in the streets. The academia has a far more effective way of dealing with political issues, by conveying knowledge that provides individuals with a way to comprehend themselves and their surroundings and teaching them how to conduct themselves in the world. India stands at an inflection point. The challenge to redefine the priorities of the education sector are humongous. Can we create an education system that is worthy of our aspirations? Can we create institutions that can mediate diverse knowledge tracks and diverse social aspirations? And this is where perhaps the opportunity also lies. Because if we can get this right at this critical juncture, then, and in my humble opinion, only then will India be able to leave its footprint on the global political, economic, and social order the way it wants to. Thank you.